Testing, testing. Get going. This is a hearing for Rulemaking 97. We're not going to actually be voting today, but the purpose of this is to hear from all the stakeholders and members of the public who wish to comment. And so pardon me, the way we're going to do this is we're going to start off with PPRP, who have 10 minutes to present, if you want. And then we'll go into Q&A for PPRP. Then we'll do a local government panel, which I understand can include up to Kent, Hartford, Kent County Preservation Alliance, United Neighbors of Manor-Stone Drive, and Chrome Hill Solar Opposition, and any other county representatives who wish to be recognized under that umbrella. We'll do questions for them. Then we'll go to the Coalition for Community Solar Access, and they will be given 8 minutes. And we'll do a Q&A for them. I understand there's a nonprofit organization presentation. They also will get 8 minutes, and we'll do Q&A. Staff will present Q&A, and then it's open mic. So that's open mic day. So the other thing is it's 11:30. I mean, I'm thinking, if we have to break this up into 2 chunks, I'm thinking lunch at 1 o'clock for 45 minutes so people can get lunch in a civilized fashion and come back. So I hate it, I don't want you running out there and grabbing something and coming back in 15 minutes. That's not fair. So let us begin with our friends from the Power Plant Research Program. And if you'd like to sit up here. And one final thing I have to say, we have a few technical problems here. And so I'm going to ask everybody to tell us your name and spell it so that our court reporter can make sure to get it. Between somebody kicking a plug out of the wall and the air conditioning making noise, it's not always easy to get everything into the record properly. So if you'll just start with, even though he's seen you before, if you could just start with your name and the spelling of it, the commission would appreciate that.
Good morning, Chair Barvet, Commissioners. Sandra McLemore on behalf of the Power Plant Research Program. And with me today I have Ginny Rogers, who's the Deputy Director at the Power Plant Research Program. And she will we provided some slides, and she's going to go through the slides, and then we're available to answer any questions you may have.
I've also told the court reporter that if he needs to stop the proceedings to get the spelling of your name, he'll do that. He's deputized to do that. So, but I think he knows your name because he's seen you before. So.
Yes, but if you could just spell it, please.
Absolutely. Sandra, Sondra, and then McLemore, MC, capital Lemore.
And I'm Ginny with a G, Ginny, Rogers, Rogers, no D. Can you tell I've done that before?
Okay, please begin.
Will you share the slides or? Okay. Okay. First of all, I would like to give regards from Mr. Sadinsky, who is the director of the Power Plant Research Program. He had a family emergency and he couldn't be here this week, so you guys have me. And like Ms. McLemore said, I am Ginny Rogers, and I'm the deputy director of PPRP.
We'll struggle through somehow.
I know. Whenever you're ready. They're on this. They're on this. What do I need to do?
Can you access them from this laptop? In other words, she wants you to take
Okay, yeah. Okay, and then what do I need to do to get them up there? Or you're going to do that?
There has to be a way. You may need to pause for a second.
Okay, let's pause for however long we need to get that going.
I mean, if you can't do it and I just talk, then I'll just talk. But go ahead and try.
I'm going to come on that side.
Okay.
Are we ready? Oh, yep, there we go. Go right ahead.
Okay, good.
All
right.
settle down, people.
Yeah, really. So I think everybody in this room is aware of the purpose of the DG-CPCN proceedings. It's to prioritize straightforward projects that do not pose significant adverse impacts to the environment. The expedited process should incentivize projects that avoid natural resource and or socioeconomic impacts, and we are well aware that project-specific concerns cannot easily be handled by a process such as this. Just to summarize the role of PPRP, PPRP was required to provide proposed standard siting and design requirements and standard licensing conditions by July 1st, 2026. We convened a stakeholder work group that discussed these issues for more than a year and submitted proposed documents for comment in May of 2026. We are aware that there were a lot of comments made during these last 2 weeks, and we will address some of the substantive comments, but not all of them. So to summarize, many of the comments petitioned to include agrivoltaics in the DG-CPCN initially. We still believe that agrivoltaics and other special cases such as brownfields, floating solar, and BESS should not be a part of this initial process. We have very few true agrivoltaics projects under review, 4 of them. We have 2 floating solar, and we have not seen a standalone BESS project come in at all. So we haven't worked with these projects yet. We're not aware of any of the special concerns that may come up over the course of a CPCN proceeding. We don't follow the recommendation for the first one until September of 2027. So if we had 12 more months, it would allow us to develop a baseline process for DG-CPCN and better understand the special cases and their conditions. Another issue that came up in the comments is the role of the counties, and we see this as a balancing act between the applicant's concerns the counties are too involved and the counties requesting even more involvement. Nobody's ever going to be happy, but somebody's going to find a middle ground. If the county is required to approve prior to applying for a DG-CPCN, it might require more work up front, but it'll expedite the CPCN process itself. And I know the applicants have expressed concern that lack of or delay in response from the counties will lead to delays in the overall process. So there needs to be some way to make the counties, enforce the counties to actually respond to the applicants. We acknowledge that staff had many excellent suggestions. Some of them here are the timing, to establish timing of the proceeding and require projects to be docketed. Staff also suggested that projects with no objections may be handled at an administrative hearing rather than an evidentiary hearing. Some of the questions they brought up and that we haven't resolved yet are how do we handle the public comment process? That was not in the regulations. Where do we draw the line between being able to apply for a DG-CPCN and a traditional CPCN review? And what would be the cost of the application to do a DG-CPCN rather than the traditional DG-CPCN? At least one of the people who commented, or one of the organizations who commented, asked if some of the aspects of the DG-CPCN can be piloted prior to implementation. And that is something that we at PPRP have discussed. We could use the standard application before it's required and see how that is established and work out any kinks that might be in the application. We are already starting to pilot standard licensing conditions in our cases now. We also could develop a standard county review form that could be used later in the process, again, to work out the kinks and to make sure everybody's on the same page. And we also know that some developers have expressed interest in participating in a pilot. There are other concerns, like always. Some of these are priority preservation areas. As you all know, I think there is a limit of 5% of the land area in a PPA can be given to solar. At this point, it's a little unclear as to who is keeping track of that. We think the counties and the Public Service Commission should coordinate to address it. And the Public Service Commission should periodically supply the counties with an acreage of approved sites so the counties can track the PPA percentages. Decommissioning, we're well aware, it's being talked about quite a bit right now. It requires coordination with the counties so that everybody is on the same page, and that is being addressed in another proceeding. There are some issue-specific concerns that are sort of hot-button topics right now. Co-location is currently under review by the Commission, as you all know, and should not be included in the DGCPCN at this time. And visual impacts is something that is very subjective and has been debated at just about every community solar CPCN case that has gone through the Public Utility Law Division in the last few months. And it's something that needs to be standardized as much as possible. So we have some proposed next steps for the Commission and for the stakeholders involved. We're reviewing suggested changes to the recommended license conditions, both based on cases that have gone through the Public Utility Law Division, as well as to the siting and design document. We're here to listen today to comments, and we may take those under consideration. We recommend, and I know some of the other stakeholders asked for more time to submit written comments. We recommend 2 more weeks for written comments, which would put us on September 2nd. I know some of the concerns by some of the county stakeholders is that not all counties knew about this proceeding. We can reach out to MACO and ensure that this is shared with all the counties. We have connections there. We would propose that we could provide revisions to the siting and design document and the recommended license commissions 30 days after September 2nd, which is October 2nd. And we need this to be established as soon as possible. There are more than 80 community solar CPCN cases that are docketed right now. We're busy, our attorneys are busy, I assume PSC staff is busy, so we're hoping that you all could move forward with regulations by early 2027. Thank you, that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's start into questions. I'm going to start with Commissioner McLean.
Good morning.
Morning.
Just to pick up where you left off there, you've got a number of community solar projects ongoing. Would you envision some of those being transferred into this program, or probably not? Given
Probably not.
Okay.
So it's not going to solve our problem in the short term, definitely. But it will help us eventually. It'll give us the light at the end of the tunnel.
Sure. And in terms of piloting the program, given that we've got, I think it's a July 27 deadline to have regs in place, do we think a pilot's appropriate, or is it maybe for a small number of?
It would definitely be a small number of
projects.
developers. Perhaps a developer could submit a draft application for us to review, and it wouldn't necessarily even go through a formal process, but our proposed application, we don't know if it's workable yet. So the only way we could tell if it were workable is if somebody tried to use it and pointed out some of the
Kind of like a dry run.
Yes.
Okay.
And, and if I may add, that's the standard application is something that we believe that PPRP believes would be very helpful, because there's so many. If everything was always in the same place, that would be very helpful. Also, though, we need to make sure that the commission and the public utility law judges believe that the application is satisfactory. And that would be another concern that we'd want to make sure of before we piloted it.
Okay. And finally, for the work group process, I know you had referenced that some counties weren't aware of it. I was wondering if you could just, describe, maybe the number of parties that were involved in the work group and maybe the number of counties that participated. I'm just curious.
So I wasn't involved in the work group from the very beginning, so I don't know how Sandra was, though, Ms. McLemore, excuse me. I don't know exactly how they were notified. We used MACO and reached out to the counties through MACO. There was a MACO representative at most of the meetings, and also Queen Anne's County and Frederick County were very involved.
Okay.
Again, I don't know how the communications from MACO to the rest of the counties happened, but as far as I know, they could have been aware of it.
Gotcha. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Well, actually, let me just, I think the totality of your question was to get a sense for who all was involved in the process. So broadly speaking, who all
Who
was
else?
involved? Yeah.
We had state agencies, obviously, Public Service Commission, Department of Agriculture. I think MDOT was at a few of the other meetings. The counties, we had some nonprofit work groups. We had the community solar associations, a Department of Planning, thank you. It started with probably 15 people, and by the end, when I started joining, it was well more than 30 people were on the work group.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I had a couple questions about just to follow up on some of the questions that were already asked regarding the county's participation. You had noted that you wanted to see some kind of standardized process so that you at least have a way of getting their comments from them. Uh, is that something that they propose to you, or is that something that you're suggesting for them?
Yeah, Ms. McLemore was part of that work group. Go ahead.
So, of course, there's many counties, correct? So some of the counties are more willing to work like that, and others aren't. I know that some counties already have a checklist, and so it's a matter of standardizing, and that's why in the slide we had to, we indicated that if they were amenable to it. Some of the counties are, in fact, amenable, but then some are not, because this is also inundating a lot of the counties as well, where a lot of these are being cited.
I mean, it's an intriguing idea because as I've had a chance to work with them on a couple of projects many years ago, and the different counties and Mako. And one of the challenges I saw was that there was obviously changeover. You start working with them during the beginning of the project, and as you get towards the end, there's new people. So I'm curious as to, that's why I was asking, did they propose this as a way of proceeding, or is it something that you saw was a good suggestion to impose, I won't say impose, but recommend?
We discussed it in a couple of the working groups with some of the county people there that were amenable to it. I do think that the planning offices, they tend to not have as much turnover. So, and that's who was involved in the conversations were the planning offices, right? Because they're the ones that are that understand the siting and design standards a little bit different and understand what the ordinances are and are. So that's one good thing, is that we were working with the actual planning offices. I think that is very helpful to do and for consistency's sake. And then as far as they being amenable, I think the representatives that were in the room were. Now, I do think other counties would not be. I think it would be a matter of what county and their position on things. But I do think it would be, and in my opinion, I do believe that it would be worth the effort to try to start a piling in, at least with some of the counties, to see if we could get something that was standardized that maybe then others would be more apt to follow.
Okay. All right. I think it has applications for a number of projects that, in addition to these, that have been out there. So, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Sexton.
Good morning. So you mentioned that the co-location issue is before us. And I know this before us. Once we resolve that issue, is it your expectation that that's also going to be in your regulations, so that you'll be defining what co-location means for purposes of these projects?
I don't think, for purposes of the DGCPCN, yes, but I think we are relying on you all as the commission to define co-location first once
Okay.
it goes through.
Okay, but the expectation is once we resolve that issue, it's going to find its way into
Yes,
into the regulations.
We envision sort of a phase 2 that is agrivoltaics, co-location, battery energy storage, brownfields, floating solar now, and co-location can be part of that group.
Okay. And then you mentioned that you're concerned that you haven't been successful at getting the message out to other counties that this process is ongoing. So you're going to sort of renew your efforts. Is the expectation that you're going to come back here with sort of another proceeding before, as you continue to work through the regulations, or is this going to be it?
I would hope for all our sakes this would be it,
Okay.
but we could submit, everybody could submit more written comments, and then we could take those comments into account and submit updated citing and design documents and recommended license conditions. In fact, with a cover letter that would say, we've also listened to comments in September.
It also may be helpful too, because I don't believe that there's a lot of issues that parties are really far apart on. I think there's a number of issues, and if we could identify those issues and comments and responses, I think it would help the commission quite a bit as well.
So you're talking about a number of issues that are contentious, whereas most of them are not contentious.
Yes, Chair.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear about that.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Hoover?
So, regarding the situation of having the applicant contact the county first. So, in the current process, when somebody files for a CPCN, we're required to send a notification to the county to say, hey, this guy's proposed this thing. If you want to participate, let us know. I guess what I'm wondering, though, is do we need to create a situation where if the applicant has to go to the county first, and the county decides to sort of put this in file 13 as a way of just making it go away, is there some trigger that the applicant can use to sort of force the county's hand or, kind of bring the issue to us?
Well, currently, they are required to go in pre-app, as you know, they have to go to the county and tell them they're about to file and provide all the documentation. And then under DGCPCN, they're also supposed to go to the county prior. For us to have, for the commission and for PPRP to be able to review with standardized conditions, and under a very expedited process, they're not going to know the area like the county is.
Sure.
The county is the one that's going to be able to indicate where some of the areas, for example, visual impact, which, PPRP without a site visit, they're not going to understand as well. So if there could be a process where the counties that would like to participate in a more coordinated fashion, if they could provide the checklist, and then it would be a lot more expeditious. For the counties that do not do that, or that is one of the issues that we one thing is if it is something, if there is an issue that is a siting and design requirement, and the project does not meet that siting and design requirement, that's one issue, or the county indicates that they don't. But the county can't say that it doesn't meet the ordinances, because it does not matter if it doesn't meet the ordinances. So I think there's two buckets there. The ordinances, that doesn't float, right? And then as far as the visual impacts and things like that, I believe in our in PPRP's proposal, we indicated that then it would go to a standard CPCN for certain things that are more contentious, like visual impacts. That is one of the issues that you hit the nail on the head on that one. That's one of the issues that's very kind of difficult, because if it's a standardized process and standardized requirements, but you have a project with case-specific issues, it's going to be difficult. So that is one of the things that is contentious that we really need to work through.
Okay, and then the other issue is this suggestion that these things be handled at administrative meetings. And I've heard this, suggestion numerous times, because I think it's a view of the, applicants that, it's a quicker process. But my pushback on that has always been, look, there's already a lot of stuff that we handle at administrative meetings, and I'm concerned about adding a whole new category of stuff that might turn the administrative meeting into like an all-day deal. So I guess the thought is, if we take these things up at administrative meetings, are we in fact cutting out the public utility law judges and their review of the process? Or do we need to have like a special administrative meeting event that's only devoted to these things, separate and apart from our regular Wednesday meeting?
So that was staff's recommendation, but I believe what everyone would like is just an expeditious way to address things that do not have any issues. So I believe any type of process that isn't a full hearing, I think that the parties, not speaking for all the parties, but I believe PPRP would be fine with that. It's just that we don't want to have to go, the parties don't want to have to go to a hearing and sit there and have to go through a process when there's really no reason for it. So there is the issue about the public comments, though. So some of them will have a significant amount of public comments, and in those cases, there should be a hearing. So to answer your question, I don't believe that the administrative meeting is necessarily a silver bullet. Any kind of meeting that's just standardized like that we could just go through and do them quickly, I think is the point. But
Suppose it could even be the Public Utility Law Judge Division that has a day or morning that just hears these quickly, the ones that don't have any controversy involved with them or public comments or anything, and that one judge can sit there and listen to 4 or 5 of them at once and just get that done. So, but necessarily, I understand you don't want more work either, so nobody wants more work.
Okay, all right, thanks.
All right, thank you. A couple of questions here. So is it envisioned that in this process, let's take visual barriers as an example here. I mean, is it envisioned that in this process there will be rules about what constitutes a visual barrier, or is this something that you want to create an opportunity for the, well, how is this contemplated, or is that just something that's in contention?
There are rules established already by Senate Bill 931 and the Renewable Energy Certainty Act,
Okay.
with the width of the height, exactly what needs to be planted, etc. What the survival rate will be. That said, what we hear from the public constantly is that is not enough, or I'm higher up than that, and the buffer isn't going to help me. And the counties are echoing what they're hearing, of course, from the public. So that's where it starts to become controversial.
That's the contention, okay.
Also, though, there are certain times when a visual impact is required. For example, if there's a historic site next door or something like that, they're required to do a visual impact. The question is, what does a visual impact include? So that's one of those standardized things that we need, that quite frankly are being worked out currently in some of the cases. These issues are coming up in all of the cases currently. But it is probably the most difficult to standardize, I would imagine.
It's difficult because it's subjective, and where I might be bothered by seeing a little bit of a solar panel through a buffer, Ms. McLemore may not be bothered, or vice versa. Or eventually, I've lived in a house for 5 years, and I don't even notice what's going on in my house anymore. But the initial construction may be what's bothering me, and it's very site specific as to who is bothered by these visual impacts, and in every case, we hear different things. Quite frankly, it's probably the hardest thing right now that we are working through.
But at the same time, the way the visual impact is done can be standardized, and the way some rules have to come around that. That's kind of that's the issue.
So let me ask you, I mean, the RESA, the Renewable Energy Certainty Act law was, if memory serves me correctly, it was debated over 2 legislative sessions, and there was a lot of stakeholder input. I know MACO was involved. I know the Farm Bureau was involved. I know that land preservationists were involved, as well as the industry. And the entire intent of the legislature, as I read the law, was to basically streamline and de-bureaucratize to the extent possible these permits, this entire process. But let me ask about this whole agrovoltaics issue. But my impression from the law is the legislature didn't intend to include that. I think maybe I'm misremembering what the law did. Repeat for me what you believe is is the proper way of handling all this.
Okay, and just to make sure you understand too, Mr. Bugelman's here today, David Bugelman's, and he was very involved with this process. So he's a very good person to ask questions on what happened at session and that type of thing. But with regard to your question about agrivoltaics, so they are not required to comply with the siting and design requirements under F.
Okay.
But it does not necessarily say they don't get to participate in DGCPCN. And so PPRP does not believe that they should not participate in DGCPCN. The problem is we can't do everything all at once. As Ms. Rogers was indicating, we don't even have one that's been going through the process. And so why don't we try to focus on these first and then include others? And the law also provided a provision there that said the commission and PPRP could work together to determine when they might want to update the regulations or process. So that's there too. And I think that was part of what was thought through at the time.
Okay. Go ahead, Chuck.
Ms. McLemore, Ms. Rogers, the idea of having one of the judges dedicated day Has that been floated, or is that just an?
No,
Okay.
I just
all
thought
right.
of it off the top of my head
Oh.
when you said maybe it's not a good idea for an ad.
Okay. Well, just in the event that starts to gain a little momentum, you may want to float that idea. So, because
Again, nobody wants more work. We understand.
right. Yeah. I know everybody's slammed. I
Yeah,
know
they
the
may
judges.
not like
The
it.
Yeah,
judges
they
are
may
very slammed. So okay.
Yeah, well, last session what the legislature did is they said, we're going to give you these many more people, but then give you this much more work.
We're the
So,
same.
you know, and I said, thank you very much. Okay, I think we have no further questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let us then go to the local government panel, and let me just read off again what's on my list here. Kent County, Harford County, the Kent County Preservation Alliance, United Neighbors of Manor-Stone Drive, and the Chrome Hill Solar Opposition, and other similarly adjacent and affiliated groups. Anybody hear from them? No. Okay, sir.
The only one that showed up.
Okay, well, we're happy you did, though. So give us your name, please spell it, and tell us who you represent.
Sure thing. My name is Paul Garrett, 2 R's and 2 T's. I'm with Manor-Stone Neighbors. And I was here in October talking about our particular project. This particular opportunity, I'm here to talk about co-location, which I know is a hot topic. But Commissioner Hoover, 2 weeks ago you asked the right question. You said, where is this happening in Maryland? And the Harkins Lane lawyer misinformed you. This is happening everywhere. He's like, oh, it's just happening here. This is a problem in every county. We've got Hartford, Carroll, Frederick, and Cecil, and probably more. And then we just heard there's 80 projects, so I'm probably off on my numbers. So this co-location issue is happening in my neighborhood. So I'm here to kind of give you a little on-the-ground feedback on that.
Okay, so before you do that, I actually am going to ask our general counsel if this presents an issue because co-location is currently before the commission.
Right, we don't want to get specific.
Yeah, no, and
yeah.
I'd love to hear from you, but I'm just concerned about.
I can dance around that.
Well, first, if our general counsel can just speak to that, because I just want to make sure we're not going to go crosswise.
I mean, we want to hear from you. We don't want you to become Fred Astaire. Let me put it that way.
Yes, I would ask that the witness try to refrain from talking about co-location issues that are currently before the commission. Sounds like the witness is able to do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, great. Oh, that was Ted Davis, our general counsel. He's our general counsel.
He's our lawyer.
Right. He's our lawyer, right.
So Commissioner Stuckman, you said come here, come often, so I am here, and I will talk about a couple other issues as well, because you know this is in Potomac. The primary, I guess, we appreciate this report. Our neighbors think this report is fabulous. It covers a lot of the issues in small cases here. And I think it's important, but I also think it's not communicated well to the public. So again, the PSC bar and everybody that plays inside this knows what's happening. But the counties, and even when I talk to the county commissioners, they don't know about this process. They don't know how to give you input here. And what I think this new DGCPCN is creating is this, getting rid of the bureaucracy, which I appreciate. We need more energy. But you get into all these little neighborhood issues, and it makes it much more complicated, and then the neighbors are totally surprised by this. And I don't know how you do a better job communicating to the public, but the way, and again, if I had 10 minutes in front of the Judge Lawrence, I tell her what was done wrong on this case from a legal standpoint, right? And it was the notification and following the rules so that these little ones slip under the radar. So again, my best point was really related to co-location. So that's kind of throwing me back. But I guess we have 2 pending motions on our closed matter. Okay, so partly I'm here to encourage the judge to rule on our matters because it I think will help direct a little bit on what you guys can and can't do related to this. But the bigger issue is also on the siting. So our current project has all these, and everything is weed covered. There's no buffer, and there's no one holding the developer accountable. Chaberton is our lead developer who's doing all of this all around the county, and there's zero accountability on are these trees adequate? Are they following the rules? And then what happens is they're selling off these projects to out-of-state private equity interests. So there's no accountability. So you can approve all this stuff, the counties can approve all this stuff, and the developers are not being held accountable. So as an IT guy, I think we need better dashboarding of what the developers are doing and what parts of which counties, how many of these projects are similar in size and scope, so we come up with some coding. But you have so much work before you, and I'm trying to decode all of these filings through your system to figure out who else has a co-location issue, who else has who else has the X types of issues. And I don't know how you guys rule on all of this because the information is so fragmented here. So all I'm doing is I'm following the pilot neighborhood solar initiatives. I don't care about any of the other ones. I care about the neighborhood ones because they impact the taxpayers. And my neighborhood is going to have traffic problems as we keep growing and growing, whether it's co-located or not. We're having traffic problems, we're having site problems, we're having property value problems. And these little things all add up to a lot. And that's very hard for you. So again, like I said when I was here in October, you have a very difficult job and the information is very fragmented here. But what would hope would come out of this process is a way for you to communicate without having hearings to the public. This is what's going on in Cecil County. This is what's going on in Hartford. And here's some of the commonalities. Because I think the legislator does not understand this. And Montgomery County people, they are overwhelmed. They can't keep up with all of this stuff. It's just too much information, and they're like, well, Annapolis told us what to do, so I'm not going to get involved in this little solar project because it only affects 50 houses. And so this is a big and growing issue. I wish I had more time to talk about co-location, but I will wait. So let me just say then on co-location, I saw this as my only opportunity, so I don't know how we communicate on co-location because our case was closed. So how could I communicate is part of the problem. Or how could I testify on co-location?
I mean,
is part of the problem here, which I understand the problem.
Well, Ted, I mean, is it acceptable for him to talk in generalities about principles, or would that run afoul of the cases that are before us?
I think that the witness can talk about generalities and not talk about anything specific that may be pending before the commission.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think he's also asking if there's a way to be able to respond when we issue, because even if you talk about generalities, we really can't take that into account.
And I couldn't come here and testify on Harkin Lanes because I have no knowledge on Harkin Lane or any other co-location. There's so many projects, so where does the public talk about this issue in the future or in the next 2 weeks?
Well, I mean, I think the way to approach this right now for this proceeding is for you to discuss broadly what you see the fundamental problems as being without...
Let me take it out of energy. How about that?
Well, okay.
Let's just say Maryland law passed, you can build an apartment building with zero zoning regulation if you do it under 100 units. Don't you think developers would build 99 unit buildings? And then if you didn't prevent them from stringing them together, we'd have a bunch of 297 unit buildings altogether because they would try and co-locate it because they try and duck under the rules. That's what business people do, and it's totally legal. But that's what is happening in generality is these developers are coming in and saying, I'm just going to be just under 2 megawatts. And I'm going to go get this other one over here just under 2 megawatts. And next thing you know, you got 6 or 8 or 14 megawatts kind of all co-located that no one saw coming because it was done by, in our case, it's one developer doing 3. In other cases, it's multiple developers or onesie twosie, but either way, it's wrong. And that's the bigger issue is how do you do this? And that's my big point is how do you control a bunch of littles becoming a big?
Okay. Well, I'm prepared to go to questions if that's so. We'll start with Commissioner Linton.
No questions.
Commissioner Suchman.
Just a clarification. So what you're suggesting, I think, is that you just want to have sort of greater transparency on some kind of dashboard, so that we have so that we can kind of view what's going on throughout the state, as opposed to just trying to guess what's going on.
For the smaller projects, absolutely. I don't think you can manage it without a dashboard because there's going to be so many if this goes through. Post 2027, this becomes kind of very hard when you have all these bigger issues to deal with, which I appreciate.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hoover.
So I guess we would like some help on is suggest, apart from this dashboard idea, other ideas that you might have for means of communication that either we would be required to do as part of the process when we get an application, because right now there is stuff set out in the CPCN process, like telling the county and other local subdivisions, but some other way for us to communicate with the affected neighbors of the potential project would probably be helpful for us, either that we should be required to do or that we should be requiring the applicant to do.
So the law says you must be directly adjacent, and that's wrong when you look at the view shed. So we have one neighbor, you could throw a rock to the solar project, and the judge didn't let her have intervener status. And you can't say she's not impacted when you can throw a rock to the solar farm. So the law is wrong on that particular issue, and the judge is just upholding the law. I think there are enough community groups, and Facebook, at least you will hit the community activist groups. If you're using that, and the law says, right, you got to publish it in a paper, and no one reads those papers anymore. So social media is the way to get to some of these community groups. And as we got activated, some of the environmental groups, some of the farm groups, and some of the groups you had in are probably the right groups. They will activate the right neighbors and then get involved. But if it doesn't start on social media, and you're putting on the developer to put it on their social media, we didn't know who the developer was. So no one's following the developer when it's first announced. And then you get surprised 9 months later when it finally kind of someone notices. And it's just not, it's an imperfect communication system.
So along that, to follow up on the social media thing, I mean, I know all the counties are different, but I mean, most of them have some sort of social media presence, right?
Correct, but they don't want to take a stand that early, right? They want the developers to say, hey, am I for this or against this? And I understand that. I've been in government. So they are just going to put out, oh, by the way, this developer might be doing something over here in your neighborhood. And nobody's going to care if this is on top of a Best Buy or a Costco, right? It's only when you're sticking it in a rural cluster or on neighboring farms is where you're running into the political issues. And that, again, becomes part of this is the rural cluster is the real problem, because we have houses and people that go to work every day and don't have time to follow all the goings on here as well, versus people who are in the business.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner McLean?
No question, sir.
Okay, and I don't have any questions either, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Hopefully I danced.
Yeah, no, it's the beginning of, it's good. Okay, so next let's turn to the Coalition for Community Solar Access, and that would be Mr. Bugelman's.
Thank you, Chair Barve, Commissioners. David Bugelman's counsel for the Coalition for Community Solar Access. You spell my name D-A-V-I-D. Last name is B-E-U-G-E-L-M-A-N-S. I'd like to cover 3 broad topics today. Or do you want me to?
Hold on. Excuse me, we're trying to hear testimony here, and thank you. Go ahead. I paused the clock, so don't worry.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to cover 3 broad topics today. First, what we think PPRP got right in its proposal. 2 critical changes that we highlight in our comments. And then third, some recommendations on next steps in terms of moving this process forward. As has been said here today, everyone in this room, I think, knows the numbers. Solar CPCN applications are up about 1,200% in 3 years. The Commission, PPRP staff, and the parties have put enormous work into that caseload. And if you look at RECA, which really tried to streamline the design requirements and deal with some local issues, we think the DG CPCN process is how the General Assembly chose to deal with that impending influx of applications. So on the first topic, importantly, we think the heart of PPRP's proposal is exactly right. PPRP's proposed standard siting and design requirements are built on the principle of impact avoidance and mitigation. So under PPRP's proposal, a qualifying project does not clear forest, doesn't affect historic resources, rare species habitat, stays out of the critical area. Among other things, it must meet the design requirements of the Renewable Energy Certainty Act, including setbacks and screening. So in other words, only projects that avoid and mitigate impacts can qualify for the process. And I think that's really the bargain at the center of this new process. The state says in advance exactly what a project must do to qualify. The project then meets those requirements, does exactly as required, and in exchange, it gets a faster review. So developers get certainty before they commit to sites. The projects that submit for the process meet stricter standards and are better and avoid potentially issues. And the commission gets a review that it can standardize, which leads to administrative efficiency. There's one principle related to this that runs through all of our comments, and it comes straight from the statute. And it's the definition of standard siting and design requirements under section 7-207.4. That definition refers to the requirements as being predetermined objective requirements. And when a project meets them, the statute says the commission shall issue a DGCPC, and it also says if they are not met, the commission shall not issue a DGCPC or may not. So the two terms that are critical here are predetermined and objective. I think predetermined, it's clear, means it's a standard that's written in advance before the application is filed, probably in the commission's regulations for the process. Objective is a little bit more complicated, but the way that we view it, and as we state in our comments, objective means effectively compliance gets verified, not weighed. So an objective requirement is something that an applicant can know in advance by looking at the studies. Has MHT reviewed the historic issues and determined that there's no historic problems? Are setbacks met? Are environmental features avoided? Those kinds of things. It's basically a yes or no question, and generally different reviewers will reach the same answer when they review those questions. A subjective standard is different. It has no answer until somebody in authority actually tells you what it means case by case. For instance, is an impact significant? Is a project in the public interest? The current CPCM process has many of those factors. There's things like the commission has to consider aesthetic impacts, economic impacts, things like that. So open-ended, there's no answer where an applicant knows in advance what to do to qualify. So that's really the sort of the key difference here with the existing process is instead of using sort of open-ended subjective review factors, the statute says predetermined objective requirements. And we think for the most part, PPRP has done that with this proposal. And again, objective we do not think means lenient. In fact, if you look, I think, at the legislative history here, the idea was this would be a high bar. So only projects that meet these strict standards can qualify for this process. And every change that we propose to make to PPRP's proposal are related to this principle. And there's only two I'll highlight here, although I'd encourage the commission to look at all of our comments. The first proposal is related to visual impact mitigation, which is handled by PPRP's requirements 35 and 36. The statute does not require a viewshed analysis for homes or schools or community resources. It only requires a viewshed analysis for certain protected resources like heritage areas, historic properties. There's a list in the statute. CCSA does not disagree with expanding the viewshed analysis to those additional resources. We think that makes sense. And you've heard today the concerns about visual impacts. Our concern is what happens once you do the viewshed analysis, because as drafted, the only way to satisfy the mitigation requirement is for county approval of a mitigation plan. So a project, in theory, can meet every standard set in the predetermined objective requirements and the standard licensing conditions and siting and design requirements, and then a county could either refuse to act or make a determination based off of no standard at all that's articulated that there has been no mitigation. Our proposed fix is something that we think is contemplated by statute, because if you look at RECA, it says that as part of these standard design requirements, the commission must adopt standard siting and design requirements that include reasonable setbacks and landscape screening requirements. So our proposal would be for the commission to adopt standard buffer yards that apply based off of different scenarios and visibility from different projects. And we have an example in our comments that explain how that would work. In the interest of time, I won't repeat that here. But that's just one way we think we could address this issue, but instead of having this open-ended review, have something that's known in advance so applicants know what to do. CCSA's second proposed change is to PPRP's proposed requirement 44. That's a provision allowing the commission to deny a project for, quote, significant adverse impacts that cannot be sufficiently mitigated. We understand the instinct to preserve flexibility, but there's no definition and no criteria here. So no applicant can know in advance whether it complies. And because it's completely open-ended, it's our concern that if there was a requirement like this, it would become the focus of every single case. Because it would be what opponents would focus on, and it would really allow the second guessing of all the other requirements that were adopted to mitigate potential impacts. So that is a major concern for us.
You have about 45 seconds
Okay.
remaining.
Thank you, Chair. I'll end by just saying, regarding next steps, I think one thing to remember is there's no regulations that are before the commission at this point. PPRP's proposed, their requirements, their standard conditions, but they're not in regulation format. There's also no procedural regulations, although there are procedural recommendations before the commission. So I think what's critical is there needs to be a process to fine-tune PPRP's proposed requirements. I think we heard PPRP say that they're willing to take more input. I think it's possible for those requirements to be adopted by order. So basically there would be procedural regulations, and then the standard licensing conditions and siting and design requirements would be a separate document. That could be a way to do it. But there's going to need to be some process to develop both of those. I think a work group can make sense, although that could be time consuming. PPRP, I think, had a proposal about reply comments and maybe commission direction. But I think that's a big issue that I would submit the commission has to consider here in terms of how to move this forward.
Okay, thank you. I also have next on the list here some solar developers. Is there anybody who fits into that bucket? If there's not, we'll just go straight to questions. Apparently nobody fits.
I don't know which bucket I'm in. That's what I was trying to determine. I'm kind of in between.
Okay, what?
I'm sort of in between a community and solar developer. My position is between the two. I'm not representing a solar developer, but I have some aspects of my written comments.
Are you representing a community group?
No. I am,
Or yourself?
I'm a resident of Maryland. I'm representing my viewpoint is.
Okay, well.
So I don't know which bucket I'm in. I was just trying to
you're.
put me in a bucket. You tell me what it is.
I think you're in the open mic category.
But I submitted comments already. So
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I'm going through this list, so.
Solar Policy Associates is the name of my company. If I'm on your list, thank you.
Oh, you are, you are on my list. So you're up next.
That worked.
Sorry, I was not notified where I belong in the agenda. So
That's fine.
I'm trying to determine that.
Maybe you weren't here when I read off all the people who were, so why don't you come up to the table and I'll give you 8 minutes.
I'm so sorry for the confusion.
No, that's right.
And I'm sorry for the interruption as well.
Not at all. Just give us your name and please spell it, and then proceed.
My name is Cora Dixon, Coradikson. I live in Rockall, Maryland, in Kent County on the Eastern Shore, just across the Chesapeake Bay from here. I submitted written comments to RM97, but thank you for this opportunity to provide additional testimony. Thank you very much. And again, apologies for the interruption. I am an independent consultant through the company that I founded, Solar Policy Associates. So the views expressed today are my own, not my clients'. I am advocating on behalf of agrivoltaics in general and as a resident of Maryland. Here's my bottom line up front. The Eastern Shore needs agrivoltaics. Maryland's policies and regulations should be supportive of dual use of solar and agriculture. If Maryland does not include agrivoltaics in DG-CPCNs from the outset, it risks stoking more anti-solar sentiment in rural areas. It is possible to proceed with DG-CPCN, including agrivoltaics, without much further complexity, as I will explain. As a resident of the Eastern Shore, I have observed that many of my friends and neighbors are not happy with the sudden influx of large solar projects. Because of my prior career as a solar industry analyst, I recognize that a 5 megawatt community solar project is considered relatively small scale. However, The people in my county are still opposed to having such projects in their neighborhood, especially if it is planned to be on a parcel that was formerly used for farmland, maybe even prime farmland. Therefore, from my perspective on the Eastern Shore, it is imperative that agrivoltaics projects be eligible for DG CPCN when the regulations are adopted, not with a 12-month delay. Under potential questions to consider, the memo asks, what specific standard conditions may be revised by a county siting agreement and how should they be identified? I respectfully propose that instead of creating a separate DG-CPCN pathway for agrivoltaics, with its additional red tape and bureaucratic hoops, any variations for agrivoltaics on the standard DG design should simply be approved in the county siting agreement, consistent with the DG-CPCN goals of clear and objective criteria. The PSC could provide reasonable parameters for the agrivoltaics variations, and these parameters would be referenced in the county siting agreement. Generally speaking, agrivoltaics projects are technologically nearly identical to solar-only projects. Some projects with agrivoltaics may already be able to meet the design criteria of a standard DG project. Other projects may have slight variations on the existing standards due to certain aspects of farm logistics. A county may be willing to accept the revised design standards because the project maintains robust agricultural use of the land, so this is desirable. Furthermore, I respectfully propose that after the adoption of these regulations, that, PSC or PPRP or whoever, organize a day of agrivoltaics training to the relevant county staff. I know we've talked a lot about how the counties need to be more looped in. Agrivoltaics is another area. This training would enable the counties to become familiar with the wide range of technologies and applications associated with agrivoltaics. Perhaps they could also visit an active agrivoltaics site, if time permits. Such training would enhance discussions between county officials and project developers. It may also lead to a greater use of agrivoltaics in their county, which has both environmental and economic benefits. So that is why I do not feel I fall into the category of developer or community. I am somewhere in between, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to questions for both of them, even though you're not really situated in exactly the same place. So let me begin with Commissioner Suchman.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Mr. Bugelman's. So I have 35 and 44 as your areas of concern.
Those are the two primary. We have some additional ones in our comments, but those are the major ones.
Okay, and for visual impacts, you would like to identify standard buffer guards as a way of making it more objective as opposed to subjective. Is that your concern?
That's our proposal. So the idea, I could elaborate. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So the idea would be that the viewshed analysis would be required. So basically, that would involve identifying potential observation points, residential properties, churches, whatever is in the vicinity, and then it's sort of like a desktop review based off of data about the topography and existing vegetation to see if there's visibility, right? And then based off of that, the requirements could then require, if there's potential visibility from particular sites, different kinds of mitigation. And if it's a certain protected or resource of concern, especially residential properties, there could be a sort of a stricter, wider buffer with different types of requirements. RECA envisions that. I mean, basically, in there's a requirement under RECA where there is, in most cases, a requirement to have a landscape buffer. It says that the maximum width is 35 feet, so it could be smaller than that, but it sort of says like you have to do it around the entire project, and then the sort of the size can be varied. So building off of that, if there's an issue with a protected resource, it could be a wider, stricter buffer, and then if there's not that concern, it could be something less. That's the basic idea.
Okay, so you would propose language that it wouldn't identify what type of buffer. It would just sort of require a buffer. And a buffer as being part of the project proposal?
There's different ways to do it. I think it could actually get into the specifics. I know, thinking about trees and shrubs is not something the commission typically does. So
I don't know that that's true. But
I think there could be a concern about, regional variability. So it could be something where there's parameters that when the project goes to the county for site plan approval, there's some local discretion within that. But I think there's different ways to do it. I think it needs to be fleshed out. But the general idea would be there are preset requirements depending on visibility from certain kinds of sites.
Okay. So 44. Now we're getting into our authority, and I think you've heard me speak about putting anything in writing that we're proposing that puts restrictions on our ability to review projects. I just don't. I mean, I understand you'd like to have some better clarity here. I'm not sure that better clarity makes sense when we're talking about commission authority. Do you have a suggested fix?
Well, I think there could be a middle ground. I don't know what the answer is, frankly, but I think a couple things to think about. I mean, the statute does refer to the standard siting and design requirements being predetermined and objective. So that's not a predetermined and objective requirement. So there is that statutory potential issue there. There could be some kind of mechanism in place where, maybe with some more guardrails around it, where if there is a commission concern and it's really articulated what that is, right, then you could be kicked out of the process or go to the traditional CPCN. I think our concern with this is it's so broad and open-ended, especially if you're talking about getting the procedural aspect of this. Maybe some projects are.
Well, actually, I'm wondering if it's even necessary. I mean, because if the commission, if it's before us and we determine that there are significant adverse impacts, we're going to reject the project. I'm just wondering if it even needs to be stated. I mean, I know that I have the statute, and the statute lays out how we're supposed to do our work. That's fine, but I don't know that you need to put anything more in here, or PPRP needs to put anything more in here about how we exercise that authority. If we have a problem, if we think that there are significant adverse impacts, we're going to exercise our authority. Anything in here that puts restrictions on it would be problematic, I think, from our perspective. So I'm just wondering if this is even necessary. But maybe you can talk to PPRP about that.
Okay.
Okay. So now I want to talk about agrivoltaics. So I guess my first question, are you suggesting that it be a requirement in this? You're not suggesting that be a requirement okay.
I want to make sure it's still an option.
Well, I guess that's my question, is that if it's a project with agrivoltaics, is it not eligible to participate in this?
Not right away. It seems that the PPRP would like to wait 12 months before including it in this pathway in the DGCPCN.
Okay.
That is what was in the memo, and that is my understanding from today.
Right.
That it will eventually, but 12 months is a long time. So.
Well, they said that there are so few, but I guess if you sort of build it, they will come. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, I'm very concerned that if developers are told don't include agrivoltaics, so therefore you can get into the DGCPCN right away, because otherwise there'll be a 1-year delay if you try to include agrivoltaics. They're going to choose not to do agrivoltaics.
Okay, and we certainly don't want, if these are projects that are ready to move forward. Yeah. We certainly don't want to discourage them. Exactly. So I guess the question, and it's too bad that PPRP is not at the table, but maybe at some point they can respond. I mean, how much of a heavy lift would it be to include agrivoltaics in this? Mr. Chair, is it okay if? Yeah. Okay.
Commissioner Sussman, I think the problem is that we don't know how to standardize regulations and requirements right now because they don't go under the siting and design requirements. They're exempt from those. I believe you just indicated that one way would be to have a county agreement, or if they already did meet the standard siting and design requirements, that might be an aspect that would have some legs, right? So if they came in with a county siting agreement that said, yeah, we're good with this project, that would be a way. I can't speak to my
Well, I mean,
client,
basically,
but that might be a
she
way.
appears to be saying that she wants for agrivoltaics not to be a requirement, but to be a permissive
Right.
use.
Right. Exactly. And PPRP is not against agrivoltaics. The concern is that there's nothing to consider what standard requirements to do currently, and there's more than just one way to do agrivoltaics.
Okay, but you guys are having a conversation now, and maybe I would encourage you to continue the conversation. I mean, to the extent that it can be
Right.
included, I think that would be great.
And to the extent that perhaps that a county has a siting agreement, that would be an interesting possibility.
Okay.
The other would be as if they already did meet the standard siting and design requirements. Of course, that would not be a problem. So those two, I think, would be helpful. But if you want PPRP and the commission to come up with agrivoltaic standard siting and design requirements before we even have one that's been cited, it's going to be difficult.
Okay.
So
But I
just
think
to
the
clarify,
conversation is a good one.
thank you for being open to the possibility, and I think it would also be possible to provide guidance to the counties about agrivoltaics so that they would understand the difference between a robust agrivoltaics project and something that does not meet that threshold. There's still a lot of confusion about ecovoltaics and pollinators and things like that.
Well, I think that was settled by the legislature.
Yeah.
It was settled. There's also a process now. Really, the primary factor to qualify as Ag PV is whether the property stays as an agricultural use for property taxes. And the good news is SDAT, which does property tax assessments, has a full team and experience with doing that. So they sort of had that mechanism in place. And now applicants, thanks to a law last year, can actually go into SDAT before they even permit a project, submit their plan about what they want to do, and they can sign off in advance. So there's a whole process related to that. Probably more information than you wanted. but-
And the developers understand that process completely, and I'm just saying maybe the counties need to be apprised as well through a training.
I do know that the Department of Agriculture is involved, and that might be something we can take back to them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hoover.
Okay, so one of the concerns that was raised was hypothetically a company who develops solar projects and then sells them off to others. That there's been this concern raised by some of the counties that, well, the original developer agreed to do X, Y, and Z, but after they're gone, the successor, either isn't aware, doesn't care, and so the maintenance of the buffers deteriorates, and so they wind up being a problem. So how do we go about assuring that developer A promises to do X, Y, and Z, then sells projects to developer or to solar owner A, that the solar owner A maintains those?
Hedge fund B.
Yeah.
So I have two totally different aspects to this. The first is under PPRP's conditions, and I think they're carried over into their proposed standard conditions. There is a notice requirement for what it's worth. It probably doesn't totally address your concerns, but when a project changes hands, there is a process that's required to notify them of the CPC and the conditions. Typically, there's counsel involved. It may not be me, but it's a pretty involved process where there's a lot of eyes on it. So there is that piece to it. As far as screening compliance goes, I really think the place where that should be checked is at the county level, because all these projects need to go to the county and receive site plan approval, and every single county has an entire staff where all they do are building inspections. Any commercial development, they're out there looking at stormwater, and so I think that's really the place. There could be, and that exists today. I don't really think the commission has to do anything for that to take place. Maybe there's an additional commission layer, but that's one thing that's always stood out to me is that you get site plan approval, that's all enforceable, and the county is there and they have that authority.
Okay, so there is one concern I have about this, and this actually comes from something I did a long time ago with when I was in the private sector like you. The concern that was raised was it's fine to say, well, we'll give the enforcement responsibility to the local governments. The problem you got is those folks already got a bunch of stuff they need to do as part of their regular workforce. And if you add an additional requirement, maybe they do it, maybe they don't do it. So you have to almost create some incentive mechanism to make sure that they're bought into it. Now, maybe just, the fear of their constituents, complaining about that, it will be enough, but you may need to do something else to sort of entice them to want to take on this additional authority and responsibility.
One thing that also just came to mind is under RECA, there is a requirement for bonding related to landscape bonds, and there's a process where it's released over time as it grows in, and so that is an additional layer. It is a responsibility, I think, on local governments, but that is there. That's another enforcement or layer to make sure that happens.
All right, so next area, you talked about the process going forward and said maybe we should do a stakeholder group, working group, something like that. I guess one of the concerns I have is, that becomes like a self-selection process. Obviously you're going to be there and the folks from your industry are going to be there because you got a big stake in this. We need to figure out some way to make sure that we get sufficient participation from the local governments, and I'm kind of at my wit's end trying to figure out how to make sure that they do it, because again their attitude is we ain't got the people to be constantly going to Zoom calls or meetings and things like this on this issue. So you may get one or two counties that are really into it because they do have the resources, but the vast majority of them don't, and but they're still going to have complaints about whatever the final product is. So if you had some thought about how to structure the stakeholder working group process that facilitates broad participation and broad representation.
I think probably if it comes down to a work group versus a commission hearing, I think a work group is easier for stakeholders to participate in because they're typically virtual. There's flexibility. If it's a hearing, you have to come to Baltimore and be here in person. So I think they're a little bit easier. I will say, looking back to PPRP's process, the way that I viewed it was, MACO was sort of there on behalf of the counties, and then they had, two representative counties, so it was, not 24 voices, it was 2, so it was a little bit more organized. I think if that's a concern, as PPRP said, you could go back to MACO, try to get them to, get more counties involved, or it could be individual notice. I know the PLJs did that for the decommissioning docket. But I think if you're trying to get that participation, a work group is probably the way to go. And a work group's not perfect. I just think just seeing where things are, our thought process was maybe a little bit more discussion could narrow the issues.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So agrivoltaics, I guess my concern about this is that it seems like this concept that everybody loves, but I'm not sure everybody quite understands what exactly we mean when we say agrivoltaics, and even myself, I'm not sure I know, what exactly counts as, good or bad agrivoltaics. Now, the representative for PPRP said that the Department of Ag is going to be involved in determining that. Obviously, I don't think we have the expertise to figure that out. But I guess one of the other concerns I have is there any potential of unintended consequences of saying, well, the project is encouraged or even required at some point to pursue agrivoltaics, and maybe some types of agrivoltaics are better than others, so that people wind up living next door not just to a collection of solar panels, but some agricultural activity that maybe they didn't quite buy into.
That's an interesting hypothetical. Where I live on Eastern Shore, they want to keep the agricultural land. So I think there's less objection to an agricultural use of the land than for solar. So actually, that's why I see it as a win-win. In the agrivoltaics right now, it is evolving in terms of different types of sort of being experimented with, different animals being used. Sheep is the most common. There's an American Solar Grazing Association, but some people are trying cattle. I've seen everything like alpacas, donkeys, whatever. I don't know about goats. Some people say don't use goats, but so there is a lot of variation in that regard. But I don't think that's a matter that really plays into this. The same is true of what crops are you going to raise and that sort of thing. So there's definitely some activity going on with experimenting with different kinds of crops. I think it's important to go forward with that, and I'm not sure that really changes the siting requirements so much in terms of putting up a solar array. I mean, the design is taken into consideration from the beginning. There may be spacing concerns or height concerns. That's going to be the extent of it for as far as this DGCPC.
But just to follow up on the sort of use of critters, for want of a better term, is there a concern that particularly in these areas that are sort of borderline, where there's some residential development, it's still primarily agricultural, that if you introduce animals into that situation, that they won't wind up becoming a nuisance to the neighbors, because they don't necessarily know what the boundaries are of the solar facility, and they start, eating somebody's roses. So.
I don't think that's a situation I've ever heard of, because there'll be a fence around it. Yeah. And actually, the opposite is some people have raised concerns that the wildlife don't have enough access to that area, and they want to put a space, in the fence to allow wildlife access other than birds, obviously. So no, I think my point is I'm on the Eastern Shore. I live in a pretty rural area. They're upset about their farmland going away. I think they would welcome any form of agriculture there, and that is a big concern. And it's maybe a blind spot here. Because obviously we're in Baltimore and we don't want to have goats wandering into our yards. But back there, it's a different story. And I'm saying this, I'm to be honest, I grew up in the suburbs of DC, so I've only lived on the Eastern Shore for about 20 years. So, but I do know the attitude towards solar is it's taking away our farmland. So here we have a solution, agrivoltaics, and I just don't see the need to delay it. I think if there's a way to keep it as part of the original design, and then you'll see projects that will incorporate agrivoltaics and perhaps learn through that process if there are things that need to be standardized or not.
Okay. All right.
Commissioner McLean?
A question, sir.
Okay. Well, I was the chair of the Environment and Agriculture Committee, and solar and line crops are completely incompatible. So it's going to be basically grazing, and pollinator habitat was taken off the table by the legislature, so that's not an issue. So it's really just grazing and maybe certain type of specialty fruits and vegetables that don't require farm equipment. So that's what agrivoltaics is, and so
not weed.
No, not weed.
I hope that there can be agrivoltaics training available to show the wide variety of.
Nah, there's no line crops are involved. Go ahead, Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a very quick question for Ms. Dickinson. You obviously have expressed a lot of understanding of what the citizens of Kent County and some of the other rural counties are interested in with regard to solar, and we've talked here about the challenges we've had in communicating with and interacting with the public and getting feedback from them. So obviously you've been able to do some of that, and I don't think you've been doing training. So what have you been doing to get this insight from the public? 'Cause obviously, aside from living there, what else have you been doing?
It's really more about just paying attention to actually a lot of it is on social media, but I also have attended some hearings for projects in Kent County. The people I've talked to, it's really anecdotal, but I have talked to some farmers who are very interested. So it is, the beginning of the process. But I think that a lot of people aren't even aware that agrivoltaics is in existence, and they just assume it's all or nothing. So yeah, I am concerned with the lack of information that's available to the counties and the residents about this option, especially when there's such a great economic opportunity for agribusiness. So I've tried my own efforts to raise awareness. I did organize an event, help organize an event back in March at Chesapeake College to show a documentary about agrivoltaics. Yeah, that was one solid thing I did. Yeah, we had a panel discussion afterwards. It was about 25, 30 people in attendance. Yeah.
No, well, I stand corrected. We did do training.
I'm sorry. It just took me a while to remember what I've been doing for the past year.
And that's helpful though, because we've been trying to figure out what do we do, and so that's from your answer. Apparently, social media, interacting with the general public, and even a couple of trainings might actually be smaller initiatives, but a good way of building a little bit of momentum. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. The next thing is nonprofit organizations, staff, and then open mic. So it's almost 1. Let's take 45 minutes for lunch. Let's come back, well, a little less than that. Let's come back here at 1:30, and we will continue. Okay. he gets here. Okay, so next on the agenda is nonprofit organization presentation. Anybody here from the nonprofits? Come right on down. You're the next contestants.
Fortified with lunch.
Okay,
Hi.
please. Oh wait, where's our court reporter?
Oh, yeah.
That's not going to work.
We're gonna have to wait.
Yeah. Especially since I have to spell my name.
Elevator.
Okay, so if you will please tell us your name, spell it, and tell us what not-for-profit organization you're affiliated with.
Will do. Chairman Barve, excuse me, and members of the commission, my name is Kathy Gramp. That's Kathy with a K, and my last name is like Grandpa. G-R-A-M as in Mary, P as in Peter. I'm here today on behalf of the Advocates for Herring Bay. We are a community-based environmental group in Anne Arundel County. Our August 4th comments focus on a shortcoming in the draft conditions for the DGCPN program, specifically the failure to address the statutory directives in Section 2B4 of the 2025 law regarding stormwater management. For reasons outlined in our letter, we urge the Commission to correct that omission and add the statutory stormwater text to the final rules. Our letter includes draft language for that purpose. We believe it serves the public interest in several ways. First, it is consistent with Maryland law. Like the 2025 law, our draft provides permissive authority and tracks lawmakers' intent by inserting the statutory language almost verbatim. Second, it is consistent with Maryland's regulatory regime for stormwater management. Like other stormwater laws, our draft relies on the Maryland Department of the Environment and local governments to implement the conditions. Thus, our proposed insert to the stormwater sections of the conditions reads as follows. Consistent with the Public Utility Article 7, 2074B24, the grading and stormwater management requirements established by counties and MDE, that's something we put in, may account for, and this is where it's verbatim, 1, the effects on runoff from solar panels and associated equipment, 2, the effects of soil characteristics and compaction on runoff, and 3, the effects of the ground cover under and between the solar panels on runoff. The key benefits of these stormwater provisions are that they will help the solar industry adapt to climate change. As noted in our comments, the existing practice of having about 25 feet of land between rows of panels, known as the disconnection method, was generally sufficient when MDE's stormwater guidelines focused on managing runoff from 1 inch of rain in 24 hours. The 3-inch downpours recently experienced by some Maryland communities suggest that the 1-inch rainfall target is outdated. MDE recognizes our changing climate trends and will be updating its design metrics soon. Fortunately for the solar industry, federal and academic experts have already identified some cost-effective ways to significantly enhance the absorptive capacity of the green infrastructure at solar sites, other than simply leasing more land to enlarge the disconnection distance. Our group used the publicly available model developed by the National Renewable Energy Lab to illustrate the effects of those best practices. We provided the results for the 4 major soil types in Maryland in tables attached to our letter. Our key takeaways were as follows. First, simply doubling the disconnection distance to 50 feet will not mitigate all of the runoff from a 3-inch or 5-inch rainfall event if the soil is compacted during construction and the ground cover is dominated by shallow-rooted plants like turf grass. However, restoring soils to their pre-compaction soil density significantly improves the site's ability to absorb runoff from those 3 or 5-inch rainfall events, even with today's 25-foot disconnection distance. Then, combining 2 strategies, decompacting soils and establishing deep-rooted vegetation under and around the panels, may mitigate virtually all of the runoff from 3 or 5-inch rainfall events in many of the scenarios. Finally, accounting for the effects of the panels on runoff is a must. In our scenarios, excluding the effects of the panels underestimated runoff by 25 to 40%. Neither developers nor regulators can evaluate the effectiveness of management practices without accurate assessments of the volume and distribution of runoff at each site. So in closing, the 2025 law expressly allows MDE and localities to account for these factors, thereby encouraging site-specific strategies for managing higher runoff. That tailored approach also reduces the risk of either underinvesting in stormwater measures needed to address climate change. Affirming these options now at the onset of the DG-CPCM program is legally appropriate, helps the industry adapt to climate change, and will protect the environment. That's all I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, first question goes to Commissioner Hoover.
So it seems to me that when we've reviewed the list of recommendations that comes from PPRP on an individual solar project, that there's usually a specific finding about stormwater management. And given the fact that MDE is one of the agencies that has to sign off on the CPCN recommendations that are submitted to us, I guess I'm a little mystified as to how this is missing from their proposal going forward.
I'm happy to try to
Sure.
help
Yeah,
explain
yeah.
that. There are a couple factors that are resulting in where current practices are resulting in potential shortcomings. One of the key ones is that there was a 2012 law that deemed, for the purposes of solar projects, that only the posts and the foundations for the panels would count as an impervious surface. So that's in a statute. And that, on my personal view, is that makes sense because that's the only impervious surface on the ground. But as a result, and this is true for a project that's being proposed for my neighborhood, the developers are designing their system to treat the runoff from the post and the foundation. So the research that has been done by this NREL, Penn State, and Virginia Tech have been doing a lot as well, have clearly shown that the presence of the panels, even though there's the green infrastructure under it, the net effect on the site is that having the airborne impervious surfaces does increase runoff and affects the distribution. So the provision in the 2025 law is giving express statutory permission, if they want to exercise it, to actually not be bound only by that 2012 law, but to be able to consider, and the way it's written is to consider the effects of the panels, which is a more holistic assessment, and in our minds would not conflict with the 2025 law because you're not counting it as impervious. So MDE right now, in their practice and the way the developers are doing it, are a bit taking a very narrow perspective because of the 2012 law, and this would provide a broader authority. One thing that has also happened in some other states is that site practices vary, where sometimes the soil is compacted, some developers will decompact it, some will plant different kinds of vegetation. And I believe particularly like in Minnesota, one of the questions is, do you give the developer credit in what you require from stormwater for those practices? Because it's not necessarily required, and it's certainly not, like right now we have this standard approach. So the theory is, if we are going to accurately assess site management strategies, by giving express authority to consider these factors, MDE or the counties could give a development credit for using those best practices at a site. It's a permissive authority to give credit. So hopefully that's helpful.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Commissioner McLean?
Thank you, sir. Man, I was just wondering if you participated in the work group proceeding, or if your comments were kind of the first time that PPRP and some of the other folks have been made aware of your issue.
Thank you for that question. Our group testified at the legislative sessions on this issue 2 years in a row, I think, as Chairman Barve indicated. So we knew it was in the law, but we were not, we weren't unaware of the working group.
Okay.
So we did not participate in it.
Okay. Well, there may be some further proceedings stemming from today, and I hope that you'll participate in those.
Thank you.
Commissioner Linton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No questions, but I do appreciate the presentation. It was very thorough. Thank you.
Commissioner Suchman?
Okay, as you were speaking, I was looking at the statute, and so stormwater, so it requires PPRP to consider. So it doesn't say they can considering. So they are required by statute to consider stormwater management. The fact that it's missing from here does not obviate their responsibility, but it certainly would make it clearer to all parties in the proceeding that stormwater management is an important consideration. So I think it just seems to me that all parties would benefit by having some language reflected in here, and I don't have much more to say than that, except that I would encourage PPRP to listen to the concerns that you have. It seems to me that if the legislature thought it was important enough to identify this as one of the things that they're required to consider, that the consideration should be reflected in their requirements. So that's all I have. And there might be a question there if you want to respond.
Okay, I have a question. I'm while you were speaking, I was looking at your testimony. You're not advocating for a rule that would double the disconnection distance.
No way.
50 feet.
No.
Okay.
No. In fact,
That was just a comment on the compaction of soil.
right. If I may, in following this issue, we learned a few years ago, the Chesapeake Bay program had a big conference on stormwater management of solar sites in the whole Bay region.
Yeah,
It's been
I
a big
remember
issue
that.
in Virginia. And in Virginia's case, they had been doing what Maryland did in the law, which was they had only been considering the posts and the foundations. But it wasn't in their statute, it was in the administrative policy. They administratively changed that, and then and David probably can clarify better, but it's my understanding, I think they changed it and basically defined the panels as impervious. And
The entire panel.
I think so. Or that was maybe their first proposal. And I think there was a lot of concern for the industry at that time that they might, in practice, I mean, once you count that, or if you go to 3 inches of rainfall or 5 inches of rainfall, you have to do more than a 25-foot disconnection distance to show you've mitigated it. And I think they were concerned about the very high expense if they had to solve the problem by expanding that distance. Leasing extra land is very expensive. But at that Bay conference, that's where, for example, we learned about the research done by these other groups that was showing that very good site management can actually take care of a lot of the problem without having to add as much land. So in our effort to say, consider these other factors, we're in fact trying to reduce the pressure to just rely on increasing the disconnection distance.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because that would cut the power generation in half or more. But I mean, let me just say that in my experience, once you've had 3 to 5 inches of rainfall, it saturates the ground, and even a field becomes the functional equivalent in a way of a impervious surface because the water all runs off. And once you, 3 to 5 inches within, that's even for today, that's rather unusual. But okay. Anyway, thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, so let's go to staff. And there they are.
Is public comment?
Pardon me?
I'm here as a member of the public.
We're gonna get to the public right immediately after staff. Okay, you've got 8 minutes, guys. OPC's not on the list. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, no, they're not on the list. Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, and Commissioners. My name is Matthew Hall, MATTHEWHALL, on behalf of Commission staff. Our comments should be relatively short today. I think the broad takeaway from what was in our written comments is our support for PPRP's proposal. Staff recognizes PPRP's experience and expertise when it comes to matters of siting, design, and licensing requirements for solar facilities within Maryland. What the proposals that we have here today are a result of a process that took advantage of that knowledge and expertise and incorporated extensive feedback from stakeholders. I did want to address a couple of points that have come up today. One is this idea of a phased approach towards implementing the DG CPCN process. Staff, as we said in our comments, is supportive of a phased approach, which would include excluding co-located projects and ones that incorporate agrivoltaics from the first phase. We agree with PPRP that at this point there just isn't sufficient information or data in order to incorporate those into sort of the basic DG CPCN procedures at this point. Another point that I wanted to cover was we are very supportive of PPRP's licensing conditions and their siting requirements. One thing that I did want to get into was the use of this voluntary application during what I might consider phase 0 perhaps, where you have projects utilizing this voluntary application before full regulations have been promulgated. Staff does support the use of this application. We think that it's a way to collect valuable data when we're crafting regulations. But I think that one thing that we need to consider is, especially when it concerns co-location and adjacency. I don't want to get too deep into that, but I think that we need to make sure that that issue is kind of fully fleshed out in this voluntary application form. I will note that it's a little unclear exactly what would count as a co-located project in this form. I think that footnote 7 defined adjacent as sort of like directly next to, and paraphrasing there. And that was a definition that was drawn from the dictionary. It's also important to note that there are other dictionary definitions which include nearby. So this idea of what is co-located, obviously the commissioners are aware that it's a hot topic at this point, something that needs to be resolved. And how that gets incorporated in this sort of voluntary application is going to be tricky. Perhaps it might be possible to use sort of the pilot program definition. It's not a perfect workaround, but until we have a full definition for what adjacency means, we want to tread lightly there. Now, going forward, I think that it's important to recognize that we do need to get some regulations drafted. As has been noted, there's a July 1st deadline of next year to get regulations promulgated. So to that end, staff is ready to assist the commission in any way that is necessary. Obviously, there aren't draft regulations at this point. We are prepared to draft some regulations and share those with stakeholders for comments if that's what the commissioners want. Also, and alternatively, we could have a stakeholder process where we hear further comments and provide draft regulations after incorporating those comments. But either way, staff is ready to assist in that endeavor. Thank you, and with that, staff is available to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner McLean.
No questions, sir.
Okay, Commissioner Linton.
No questions.
Commissioner Suchman.
Just a clarifying question about process. So PPRP is working on their requirements. Is it that you will then do your draft requirements, your draft regulations based on what they develop, or are you? I guess I'm a little unclear about what you're seeking from us in terms of guidance on this. What would the regulations do? Would they set out a process? Would they incorporate what the requirements are that the PPRP has developed? So it's.
I think that they would be mostly process oriented. At least that's my my idea of what it would be at this point. Getting stakeholders involved early, I think, would be important to kind of understand exactly what we might need beyond that in these regulations. But at this point, I do think that it would be kind of separate and apart.
Okay, and then what would you need from us? You'd be able to initiate this on your own, or do you need some guidance from us in terms of an order? You actually don't need to. I mean, if you haven't sort of spoken internally, can you kind of talk internally and figure out what you need from us in terms of getting the process going?
Yes, I can definitely make sure that we do that.
Right. Okay. Because you have a deadline, and that's always a stressful thing. Okay. Thank you.
Hoover.
So this idea of creating some sort of administrative process for reviewing these applications, I mean, does staff have any thoughts about how they would participate in that? Since it would mirror, what we do with the regular administrative meetings, would be either, a special meeting, either before us or the public utility law judges to evaluate these things. Staff obviously has to do its own analysis and have you thought about how you might participate in that process?
Overall, our understanding is that our review process wouldn't be more than what we would do in a regular, ordinary, traditional CBCN process. Our goal will be to verify the technical feasibility and characteristics of the projects as we do with CBCNs traditionally. Of course, we don't want to duplicate what PPRP reviews and advises on based on their expertise. Staff has its own area of expertise that we oversee in regards to these types of projects, and so we look to stay within that same realm. I think the overall idea is how we can standardize some things and make the process a little more streamlined.
Okay, all right.
Sure.
And just to follow up on Commissioner Hoover's question, and that would be this idea of sort of streamlining, that's part of what you anticipate in terms of regulations. Is that, or are these regulations different?
I think the regulations are the same, incorporating or establishing a process in which we can streamline these types of facilities that fall within the parameters of RECA and DGCBCN. That's, and of course, incorporating these standard siting and the siting standards that and design requirements that the work group or PPRP has established to whatever extent that is in regards to establishing these regulations. So I think that's the overall idea in regards to what needs to be developed.
Thank you.
I have no question, but I will point out that I have this lonely little quest to have the law pronounced RISA, since the C is pronounced as an S and not as a C. But I have a feeling I'm going to fail. Okay, thank you very much. Let's proceed then to the open mic portion of this. Sir, why don't you come right up and tell us your name and spell it, and
I have written comments.
if you just give it to our advisor here. How many other people want to testify after this gentleman? I think you may literally be.
I think he's it.
I think you're it. Okay.
I'm going to close this show.
You are.
Okay, my name is Tom Dietz, and I'm a resident of
If you could spell your last name.
Dietz.
Okay.
Diet with a Z. And I'm a resident of Chestertown and Kent County. And I am I'm testifying as a private citizen, but I also am a clean energy and municipal sustainability advisor for the town of Chestertown and some other towns within Kent County. I work with small communities on solar development. In general, I support the goal of the proposed DGCPN process. Well-sited community solar projects should have faster, more predictable permitting processes. My concern is that the proposed rules do not clearly address what happens when a project meets the standardized siting requirements, but nevertheless raises legitimate project-specific public interest concerns. PPRP gives the counties an important role, but that role appears to be primarily directed towards determining compliance with very specific standards, setbacks, screening, view sheds, and environmental impacts and other similar requirements. PPRP itself describes county sign-off as evidence that particular mitigation requirements have been satisfied. I have some concerns about some specific instances. And I'll use as an example a case that's actually before the Public Service Commission. It's case number 9786. And this is the proposed Halo project in Betterton, Maryland. And it illustrates the issue, I think, particularly well. Although I recognize that that Halo project is within, that project itself is within the Betterton town limits, and therefore would not necessarily qualify under DGCP CN. Sorry if I'm not fluent with the acronyms. Would not qualify for the process as currently defined. However, if you just take that project and move it one lot over, it would have many of the same concerns in terms of siting. Okay? And, my concern is that particularly in small rural communities, when you place a community solar project just outside a small town, that's a major impact. So that project under the DGCP-CN process could conceivably satisfy all the prescribed setback, buffer, screening, growth, and environmental requirements, but still raise some serious concerns for the adjacent town. Its future growth, its community character, cumulative land use, and whether that particular location is appropriate for that town. There's another concern that I'll raise, and it has to do with a concern that's common in rural Maryland, and that is the use of prime farmland. In counties such as Kent County and many other counties, particularly on the Eastern Shore, the loss and fragmentation of productive agricultural land is a significant long-term public interest concern. Yet prime farmland does not appear to be highlighted in the proposed process as a distinct siting criteria. A project could therefore meet the standardized requirements while converting high-quality prime agricultural land, even though there may be less productive nearby that would be a preferable site. The comments about agrivoltaics, I think, are particularly important here. That could be a potential mitigation, but nowhere does that show up in the current process. So where in the DGCPN process are these concerns considered? The county checklist appears to be designed to document specific conclusions about compliance with the standards that they will be setting out. It does not appear to give the county an independent ability to determine that a technically compliant project nonetheless presents significant public interest concerns. I am not suggesting that every local objection should stop an expedited process. That would defeat the purpose of the CNCP.
CPC, and you were close enough.
I'm close. So what I'm recommending as a safeguard would be that when a host county or an adjacent municipality identifies, and of course the county would be working with the municipality to identify those concerns, they identify a substantial documented public interest concern that cannot be addressed through the standardized process, that there should be an off-ramp and from the expedited process and then move it into the standard process. That would preserve the expedited approval for straightforward, situated projects while ensuring that unusual projects with other major public interest concerns would get the more complete review. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. We'll start with Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very quickly, as you know, you're the only member of the public that showed up here today. So I'm just curious as to how you found out about this proceeding. What's your what information brought you all the way down to Baltimore?
So we have a pretty active community in Kent County. I'm actually been very involved with the Chestertown Municipal Solar Project, where we're actually building a community solar array and a town solar array. They're actually co-located, but they're each about 1 megawatt each.
Okay.
And so I've been very involved in that, and I'm starting to work with some of the other towns. So I have been very engaged in the whole process of understanding, how this all works. And so when I heard about this through some of my colleagues, I thought I should express some concerns.
Okay.
And my interest is I'm a strong advocate of solar energy, but I want to make sure that the projects are sited in the right places. And there's some places I think are inappropriate, and I think there's some places that are very appropriate. And particularly on the Eastern Shore, we have a lot of solar development because we have a lot of flat land, a lot of cleared land, and so it's a big concern within the county.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Commissioner Suchman?
So I guess what you're suggesting, I mean, sort of recognize that we have our own responsibility to ensure that the public interest is protected. I guess your concern is that by the time it gets to us, it's already gone through a lot of, and it's hard to slow that train down.
Right. My concern is that the DG-CPCN process could essentially put this on such a fast track that you may not necessarily hear those concerns, and it'll get approved too quickly.
Okay, so when would you like the public interest issues to be addressed?
Well, and that was, in reading the process, it was unclear to me when and how that is done today.
Okay.
And so that was a gap for me in understanding the process, because it appears that the county's doing a lot of the kind of vetting that all the requirements are met, and it wasn't clear in the process as to how were those remaining public interest concerns being addressed.
Okay. So I guess that's the message back to PPRP, is that you would be interested in having some place along the line where if there's a serious public interest concern, that is heard.
Right.
Okay.
And then, the secondary concern is about prime farmland. We want to preserve prime farmland or use agrivoltaics to at least have a significant agricultural benefit from, what we can get from that land and still get the solar at the same time, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Hoover?
So regarding this last suggestion you made about if the host county or an adjacent municipality identifies a substantial documented public interest concern, the current process, as we discussed earlier, requires us to make notifications of affected areas. But how would you go about determining? I mean, would the applicant be required to contact these adjacent landowners and let them know? Or?
In my view, that would be part of the county's review.
Okay.
Okay. And the county then would be responsible to reach out to the community. They're local.
Okay.
The county would reach out to the community and make sure there are no residual, major public interest concerns.
Okay. I see. Okay. All right. That makes sense. All right. Thanks.
Commissioner McLean?
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, sir. I think you raised some good points, but I don't know, under the way the statute is currently written, that your issues can be addressed through regulations. That's, I guess that's just more of an observation.
Yeah, and that was my concern. It seems like the process as proposed is a fast-track process.
That's the
Says
intent.
that if you meet all these requirements, then you're approved. But there's still the public interest element that must be addressed, and it wasn't clear to me in the process as to how that was happening.
No, and I think that's fair. I know there's definitely references to public hearings in the statute, but how that feedback is incorporated into it when you have a standardized checklist.
Right, and then when does it raise above the level of, it's a minor concern to it's a real concern?
Right.
And at which point then I would advocate it goes back to the PSC, the full PSC for your review.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you, sir.
The legislature really wants to build a lot of solar, and they want to do it at the lowest price to consumers possible. And the reason for all of these laws is it's an understanding that when you put solar on rooftops or in brownfields, it's the most expensive electricity ever.
Yep.
And so, and which is why we don't see any solar on over parking lots, because the cost of drilling into asphalt completely defeats the purpose of producing these things. And so it tends to be agricultural lands. Didn't the legislature, though, take care of this problem by limiting to 5% the amount of priority land that solar can be deployed upon? Deployed on? Isn't that their statutory solution to this?
Right, but I believe the Kent County Commissioners actually wrote a letter to the PSC about the amount of that land in Kent County, and it's huge, okay?
But it would have to be less than 5%, correct?
But it's still a huge number. It's still a huge amount of acreage within Kent County.
Okay, but 95% can't be built upon, by definition.
And I think there's different classifications. That's not all the farmland within Kent County. So there's a lot of farmland that's not in that classification that's still very good farmland.
Okay, I don't have any other questions. Thank you very much. And so I believe that is the end of the agenda, the beginning of the process for us, but the end of the agenda for today. And so I believe, at least as a commission, I'm not going to see your smiling faces until next week, I think, right? Yes, that's... Well, yeah, that's right. Not till, well, we have a virtual on Monday, so that's going to have to be close enough. So with that, thank you very much. We're adjourned.